They're getting copies of these slides, is that right? At some point in time? Yeah, so, and video too? Okay, so if you want to get a hold of me, that's how you do it. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Minnesota Bill. And if you want to know where Minnesota is, what's this? I have no idea. No. But see, we're all the way up by the Canadian border. Just so those of you who are geographically challenged, that's where Minnesota is. Now, because of our reputation, a lot of people think Minnesota is just a place where there's a lot of snow. And you would not be wrong. But we handle our snow pretty well. The wildlife certainly seems to know how to get through it okay, as do those who need to plow. We just do all sorts of things to help everybody deal with the snow. But I want you to know that for 11 days in the summer, it's actually quite nice. Summer's the best 11 days of the year in Minnesota. That's actually the headwaters of the Mississippi River, if you ever want to know what that is. And you can just walk across the Mississippi. It's in north central Minnesota.
Not in Tennessee.
Not in Tennessee, no. No, you guys don't have snow in Tennessee. It is there. It's actually more like a creek at that point. Yeah. So you might be feeling something like this about now, and I wouldn't blame you. We have tried to align our decks as much as 5 or 6 rather arrogant, opinionated, we're always right types of instructors can align our decks. And so my task today is to talk about findability. Okay? This is going to be the overall agenda for what I'm going to do today. How do we find information that we're looking for? Why is it important? What's the difference between putability and findability? Okay? So, did I make the words up? No, I didn't. Actually, some people think I made up putability, but this word actually came from a student of mine at a conference. Because I was talking about how information goes into the information system, and this guy blurted out, "Oh yeah, that's putability." And I thought, "Oh, okay." Well, you know, in HTML or HTTP, you have the put command, right? So, live with it. It's a good word. All right. So, to find information, we, depending on what we want, we consume information differently. We're going to talk about this piece. We'll talk about how we use berry picking. You'll know it as something else, but what they call it in the industry is berry picking. And I do not have totally coherent thoughts on this yet, but the mobile piece is significantly changing findability, and I think the jury's out on how that's going to happen. We're also then going to be applying this to the Fizz demo, or the Fizz concepts that we've been working with all along. By the way, here's a joke that every one of you will use and none of you will want to laugh at. Where's Paul? I was going to do this for Paul. Oh, jeez. Okay, I might have to wait till Paul comes back in. All right. Content generators use information channels to create information vehicles for customers. I'm not going to read the whole slide to you. The point is that people who generate content usually push that content out via channels, and it gets consumed in a certain way. You want my glasses? You need my glasses? You're squinting, buddy. You need my glasses, don't you? And I'm not going to read this slide to you either. But the deal here is that depending on the type of information we're consuming, we will trust, not just consume, but we will trust from different channels. So for example, how many of you trust Facebook for SharePoint technical information? Yeah, very few of you. And 2 guys at the table in the back, right? How many of you trust Facebook to get the latest social information on your friends? It's okay if you raise your hand. We're all Facebook users. It's kind of like being an alcoholic in an approved way, okay? So where would you go? Okay, so what's your role, sir? What do you do?
I'm a consultant.
You're a consultant. Okay, and you consult on SharePoint, I assume? Yes. Or maybe WebSphere?
SharePoint. Absolutely.
PeopleSoft? Okay, yeah. Where do you go to get technical information on SharePoint?
Google, actually.
Google? Where do you go to get technical information on SharePoint?
Twitter.
Blogs, Twitter? Okay. Ma'am, where do you go to get technical information on SharePoint? Okay. Anybody go, besides blogs, because that's usually a common answer for technical information, anybody go anywhere else? The consultant you hired in. Who reads the books? Who reads Twitter, right? Where do you go to get information? Andrew? Yeah, Microsoft.com. You're going to go out and read the white papers. How many of you... Eric Schups? Gosh. Is Eric in the business track? He's not in the business track. Yeah, okay. Where do you go to get information on your friends besides Facebook?
I asked my friend.
You actually talk to him? Yeah. God, you're a unique person. All right. Where do you go to get information on your community, wherever you live?
Outside.
Outside? You just walk out the door? Boy, this is the last day of this session. This is the last session of the day, isn't it? Well, wouldn't you go to the website for your community, right? Maybe? Am I wrong? Okay, maybe I am. All right. The point is we go to different places. We trust different types of information when we're consuming different types of information, okay? Now, the classic information retrieval model that the Humble keyword is built on, that Google, Bing, Alta Vista, Yahoo, Ask, Jeeves, all the rest of them are built on, is this model right here. You put in a keyword, and if the keyword is in the content or in the metadata, you are going to get back a list of content items that has that keyword. Of course, it doesn't really matter if the keyword is actually what you're looking for, right? You're just going to get the content items back. It's going to return a syntactically correct result set. But it won't differentiate between a horn, or a horn. Is it a horn, beep, beep, a horn, da-da-da-da, or a horn, you know, like the horn of a ram? Is it a bonnet or a bonnet? Is it resume or resume? Right? Is it a boot or a boot? You see where I'm going with this? Okay? So that's our classic information retrieval model, and that basic model hasn't changed in 30, 40 years. Whenever they started indexing things, this was it, and we're still doing it today. Okay? Does this produce findability?
Yeah, to some extent.
Does it produce retrievability? Somewhat, just like it produces somewhat findability, right? But what a lot of us do, well, let me go forward and then I'm going to come back. No, guess I'm not going to go forward on this one. What a lot of us do, I thought I had a berry picking slide in here. What a lot of us do is we enter a keyword, we get a result set, and we learn how to enter a better query. And so we enter a second query, or we modify the query that's currently in there, right? And we get a different result set. Oh, and then we click on a few things, and that's not really what I'm after. And so we come back and, you know, and we do that 3, 4, 5 times as we learn. It's called berry picking. It's kind of like you have a basket and you go out to a bush that has berries and you're going, oh, I like that one, and so I'm going to look around for others that look like that. Oh, this one's nice. And you learn as you're going along in terms of findability. Okay? Now, let me sidebar here with you for just you people over here. No, just kidding. Let me sidebar with you guys for just a moment and ask the question. Do you berry pick when you do metadata on documents within a corporate environment? I bet you do, but you shouldn't have to. What would be one of the things that would keep you from having, or not you personally, but your users, from having to berry pick within your environment, assuming that your metadata is fairly well thought out and it's fairly well applied to your information? Common terms. And what gives us, I love you, man. What gives us common terms?
Rules?
Okay, I'm asking the wrong question because you answered the right answer to the wrong question. What document would give us the common terms? What would that be called? A dictionary or a glossary, right? In other words, we went through and defined some of the key terms that we're using in the metadata so that we have a shared understanding of the meaning of those terms. So if one of your metadata terms is horn, you've defined it one of three ways, and by nature of doing that, you've excluded the other two. Does that make sense? One of the things that you might want to look at in terms of taxonomy development is making sure you have some kind of a glossary or a dictionary of your core metadata values, not the fields, but the values in the fields. Questions or thoughts so far? The only thing I want you to see is that by 2016, Forrester is estimating there will be 126 million touch devices, what they call tablets, in the United States. That will also be relatively the same over here in the UK. And what I'll show in a later presentation that I'll tip my hand on now is that the whole mobile device, this is one of the concepts that I'm dealing with right now that I can't fully articulate the way I'd like. But the whole concept of the mobile device is helping to shape how we organize information and how we find it. Now, think back to the SharePoint, the early days of SharePoint. Anybody here work with 2001? Anybody have that incredibly uplifting experience? Remember the alerts were such a big deal in 2001? Something changes and the change finds you. Now today we take alerts for granted. Something changes and it finds us and we just think that's commonplace. 10 years ago that was a big deal. Woohoo, right? The mobile device thing is headed in that same direction, but it's not just alerts, it's the personalization of how I consume information. And to take a metaphor, many of you have heard the metaphor, the medium is the message. I'm kind of heading down that path where I'm saying the form factor is, in part, the organization. Because how you present information is very different in a tablet than it is in a desktop. Just think it through. Hang on to that. You don't have to agree with it. I'll come back to it tomorrow morning when I talk some more on this point. But mobile is here to stay, and mobile is changing how we do business. Now, look at this first. I'll just read part of this upper left paragraph, and then I'm not going to read the rest. Okay, don't worry. Due to technology limitations, application process and data integration efforts evolved over the years into separate silos, making it difficult to support effective end-to-end integration that encompasses all three. It's talking about holistic integration of information. This situation is beginning to change with the arrival of more comprehensive tools that address the full range of integration needs. What comprehensive tools is Forrester talking about here? He's talking about the integration of touch devices with cloud. Okay, that's what they're doing. Social technology is becoming your enterprise plumbing. Now, we wouldn't have thought that. Have you ever thought of your tablets and your Androids and your iPads as enterprise plumbing for your information? But that's what Forrester is finding out in their research. So how you find information is rapidly changing than even how we would have talked about it 3 years ago or 2 years ago. Had I done this presentation, maybe I did do this presentation 2 years ago. It was in this room last year or 2 years ago, and I did something I don't know, I was yelling. I don't know, I was all worked up about something. But look at this. Today's applications treat social as a silo capability, integrating it as an add-on or an afterthought. Tomorrow, watch this, social interaction will become a part of normal workflows, and applications must be architected from the inception to enable this. In other words, the user base will demand personalization and access to information through the touch devices that they choose, not you. And they'll demand that the workflow and the process integration and the information flow will be integrated with those touch devices. Okay? So how do we find information? Sometimes it's going to be, oh, I like that. Why does he have red all over his face? Oh, berry picking. Oh. Can I have that, Andrew? Can I take that home with me? Thanks. So, you see where we're going with this? Okay? Now, I don't have fully formed thoughts here. I'm kind of like a baby in this one. All my synapses aren't firing yet. But rest assured that all of us are going to have to deal with this in the future. So, expectations are changing on how we find information. And as the younger crowds move into more and more lower in the mid-level manager and sometimes upper management positions, they are expecting and assuming more, shall I say, not only personalization, but this on-demand findability. Is the best phrase I can come up with right now for it. Okay? They're expecting more personalization, more on-demand, more delivery vectors if they want it on their phone, if they want it on their tablet, if they want it on their desktop, if they want it, on a rolled-up screen or something, And they want it more precise. I just want what I want. Now, go back to Google for just a moment. How precise are most of your queries in Google when you put in the humble keyword? They're not very precise at all. So you put in something like SharePoint and you're going to get 674,000 websites. Not very precise at all. What does it take to do precision? And what concept would be behind the whole, what concept would help us discuss precision? Does anybody know? And what would it take to get precision? There's two questions. Tags. Metadata helps us get precision. What's the concept behind this? The concept is called the long tail. I would really advise you to read this marketing book called The Long Tail. And the long tail is what online marketers and online people who run online stores, e-commerce sites are finding is that they might sell 5 million, let's take a bookstore for example, they might sell 100,000 copies of this one book, and that's all well and dandy, but they make more money selling one copy of 500,000 books electronically. See? But how do you find that one? How does the one person a year find that one book? Through accurate tagging. It has to be very precise, a precise result set given back, probably for a very generalized keyword entry by the user, unless the user has been berry picking and has refined that keyword to the point where they can find what they're after. Personal example. How many of you have heard of the movie Evil Roy Slade? No one here has. Because none of you are true connoisseurs of comedy. I'm just telling you right now, you're not. Because if you were a true connoisseur of comedy, you would have heard of Evil Roy Slade. And I saw that movie when I was a boy, laughing my sides out, and then I couldn't find it for like 30 years. I kept going to these every once in a while I'd go into Blockbuster and some of these other video flick stores, and do you have Evil Roy Slade? And they'd look at me like I was a moron, which I get fairly anyways. And so then I went to videoflix.com. I ran across this thing, Evil Roy Slade. Boom, there it was. Boom, I bought it. I now have Evil Roy Slade. I was probably the only person that year who bought it. And there's 40 of us in the Facebook group. I'm just saying. All right? There's 40 other people in this world who love that movie. But that is a long tail find. How many sites do you have in SharePoint? How many of those sites are only accessed by a few people a few times in a given time period? Most of your SharePoint sites are long tail sites. How do you make sites and lists findable? Does anybody know? For today, it's the description field. You put your keywords about that list or that site in the description fields because those description fields do get indexed. I'm not saying it's a great method. It is a method of making those things findable. Questions or thoughts at this point? Yes, sir.
If you're talking about getting closer to more context for people to understand what people want, so if you say more understanding that person, giving the most appropriate response, are you getting to the stage of saying the person identifying the information as well?
Boy, I lost about half of that. I got to tell you, you're going to have to either speak up or I'm going to have to walk over beside you.
Impressions you were talking about with social and targeting results back to users. You start approaching the scope of the person identifying the information as well as understanding the user and what context they probably want.
Mm-hmm. How do you determine the context in which they want something?
Through understanding them, their job, what they do, what they're interested in. Location.
Okay.
Personal information.
How many of you know what SMTP is? What is it?
Simple mail transfer protocol.
Bingo, there you go. So those of you who know SMTP, put your hands back up so I can pick on somebody else. Okay. Sir, what's the first command in SMTP?
Hello.
Right. Okay. And what's the command that actually gets the data? Yeah, data. Very good. Now, if it's extended SMTP, what's the first command in extended SMTP? Okay. You don't know that. EHLO, E-H-L-O. Okay. EHLO is the first one. And what port number does SMTP run over? 25. Very good. And if you're using SSL for SMTP, what port number does it run over? Yeah, you don't use SSL with SMTP. That was a trick question. All right, now, there is no secure sockets layer for that. My point is that some of you, how many of you were lost in that 1 minute of conversation right there? It's okay if you were. Okay, and I did that to illustrate the point. Some of you, if you were looking for SMTP, some of you would have been looking just for the introductory data, the context. Other of you, if you put in SMTP, you're not looking for introductory data, you're looking for knowledge, understanding, maybe even wisdom about this technology. Sometimes when a person enters a keyword, you don't know which of the 5 levels of information they're actually after. One of the things that you can do to help improve findability within your organization is to teach users to just think through what kind of information they're after and then help them map that to the tools. So for example, if they're looking for an exhaustive, broad brush query, in other words, they want the result set to include almost everything that they can find, then they're probably not going to have a very precise keyword entry because they want to try and grab as much as they can. If they're looking for something very precise, then you're probably going into the advanced search web part and you're entering in the various metadata fields with terms in there, as well as the keywords that they want out of the content, and maybe even you're looking up author and date and some other things, and you're really honing it down. If you want something very precise, okay? So giving the user some education on how to commit queries could be just as important as tuning the back-end search and the metadata and all of that. Okay? Questions or thoughts? Is that helpful to your question? I don't know if I answered that very well or not.
Yeah, it was more of an observation. So, yeah.
Oh, okay, it was an observation. Oh, well then I could have just skipped it all together, right? Okay. All right, and I have till what, 6:30? It's 4:30 now? Okay. Am I buying the beer?
Wait till 6:30, you'll buy the bed.
If I go to 6:30, I buy the beer. Well, okay. I'll buy the beer. Why is findability important? Do I really need to talk about this? In all honesty, Google's promise, you know, the yellow boxes, literally their promise in their marketing for a lot of years was just plug it in, turn it on, and find it. Well, it works if your corpus, in other words, the size of the number of elements that are in the population data set of findable objects is small and homogenized. Okay? But if the data set is large and disparate, it makes it more difficult. Or if the homogenization has different meanings within the terms, going back to the horn thing. Okay? But they really thought that if you plugged it in, you turned it on, you enter your key, you find it. And once that happens, the clouds part and the angels sing and everybody's happy, right? I define findability. Why is it important? Because you can't use what you can't find. Your customers can't buy from you what they can't find on your website. And if it's hard to find, it's hardly used. Okay? I was working with a customer recently who was generating a lot of queries off of Google onto a particular page on their website. But once the folks got to the website, they weren't finding what they were after and they were bouncing right out. So the marketing was working, but they were, the information was hard to find, so it was hardly used, so they just bounced out. What's one of the characteristics of findability? Let me ask it a different way. What's one of the characteristics about the people and about us, really, who are trying to find information? We're not going to work hard to find it. George Zipf, Z-I-P-F, go read George Zipf from the 1950s. He was a linguist at Harvard. He did some studies, and he found that, generally speaking, the harder the information was to find, the less likely it was that people would try to find it, because we all do the minimum that we have to do to get our job done. That's it. Okay? And because we all do the minimum that we have to do, we're going to do the minimum amount of work to find the information that we absolutely have to have, and that's all we're going to do. And if it's too hard to find, we're just not going to look for it. We'll just live without it. In fact, some information, if you have it, it makes your life more difficult than if you didn't have it, which is why you don't try to find that information. And we won't go into personal illustrations about that, okay? There was a joke. It's okay. Now, you can do all of these things up here correctly that you can get in all the other tracks here at the conference. You can still screw up your SharePoint implementation because your information is not going to be findable. And I would submit to you, I'll let you read through those slides at another time, but I would submit to you that findability and search are not the same things. And a lot of people think, and Microsoft has sold, that if you have search, implicitly you have findability. Nothing could be further from the truth. Okay? What's that? I can't hear you, I'm sorry. You can refine? You can refine the search. You can berry pick all day long. Right? How many queries, by the way, this leads me to something. How many queries does the average information worker commit on a daily basis? Anybody know?
20.
20. Very good. And how many hours per week does the average information worker recreate information that they know exists but they can't find? How many hours per week do they spend in that activity? On average.
20 is a good number.
3.5 hours a week. That's an IDG study. 3.5 hours a week, the average information worker spends recreating information that they exist but they can't find it because it was either too difficult to find and they didn't want to try that hard, or it was too difficult to find and it was just faster to recreate it than it was to try to find it. How many of you have built essentially the same spreadsheets over and over and over again with essentially the same formulas in them? Roughly. I have. Come on. It's, you know, it's Alcoholics Anonymous. We're all in the same support group, okay? Where do people go to get information? The internet? Intranet, desktop, line of business applications. Did you know that Forrester just came out with another study that shows that most companies only use 5% of the information that's actually available to them? So let's see. Sir, what line of business are you in?
Engineering.
I'm sorry?
Engineering.
Engineering. And what kind of engineering? Mechanical?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. What line of business are you in? You're a consultant. Okay, I need a non-consultant here. No, actually, I'll work with you. And what kind of consulting do you do?
ECM systems.
ECM systems, okay. And are you on the technical side, the sales side, pre-sales? All of them. So are you a project manager too?
No, sort of founder, so I get involved in all sides of the business.
Okay, so you own the business.
Yeah.
Okay, so now think about this. He runs a consulting business. He's the founder, but he also does some of the work. So you work in the business as well as working on the business.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat you're in, okay? I get it. So think about all the different places he needs to go to get information to do his job. Call them out. What are some of the places he needs to go to do his job? And he needs to be on top of this. Where's all the places he's got to go?
His employees.
His employees. He's got to find out what they're thinking. Okay, what else?
His clients.
His clients. He's got to find out what they're thinking. Peers. Do you ever meet with other business owners?
No, but you might want to spot their trends and what they're doing as well.
Yep. And where would you go to spot trends and industry trends and what peers are doing?
Conferences.
Conferences?
Twitter.
Twitter?
That's why you use it. You use it.
Wow.
You see what everybody else is doing.
I'm just stunned. How old are you, just out of curiosity?
30.
30, see? And it's working. It just so fits the model. Where else? Because I'm 51, and I'm like, dude, you go to Twitter for that?
I don't
And
tweet much, but other people tweet a lot.
they do tweet a lot.
Businesses tweet a lot. And your competitors tweet a lot. And it's not that they have a new press release or whatever. Nobody cares about that. It's you see what they're doing. It's a valuable source of information about your competitors.
See?
It's a quick way to digest information as well. It's not these big, huge blogs that you got to tread your way through. It's 140 characters or less. What are you doing?
Boom, done. All right.
And you can focus on a lot of different people in a short amount of time.
Where else does he need to go to get other kinds of information?
Microsoft, other,
So technical information, he'd go to Microsoft, blogs, wikis, Twitter, those kinds of places. What other kinds of information would he need to consume? I'm sorry? Legislative, can I globalize that to regulatory? Regulatory information, so you've got compensation issues, HR issues, benefit issues, all that kind of stuff he has to consume as well, right? And he's got to go to what, websites, books, references? Yeah. The number of sources that we need to go to get information is often just bewildering. And we are bombarded with information. And the number of information sources that we need to stay on top of can be tremendous. Now, that's what, so, you know, when the Forrester says you only use 5% of the information that might be available to you, I think it's in part because you can't consume 100% of it. You may not be able to consume 20% of it and remain a sane person. Okay? So, understand that that's what your users are up against. You're probably up against it personally. I know I am. I think bullet points 2 and 3 are the same side, or two sides of the same coin, quite frankly. Okay? But the whole mobile device integration, I threw that in on Sunday. I just put it up there just to get it in my head again, and your head too, that the whole mobile devices is going to change how we organize information. I can't articulate how yet, but it will happen at some point in the future. What about tuning search? I think, sir, you mentioned refining search. Yeah, you can certainly do that. But if you're only refining the findability part, then it's kind of like polishing the car without fixing the engine. Okay? The ship is still going down, but you're standing on the deck and saluting because it looks much better. All right? The undeniable truth of information manglement is that how information goes into the system, the putability, will directly impact how it comes back out. Okay? Garbage in, GIGO. Garbage in, garbage out. Right? Now, what would constitute, now let's go back to some traditional ways of thinking here. Let's go back to a traditional records management. No, let's not do that. Let's just use SharePoint. And you're taking these documents and you're putting the documents in SharePoint. And let's say that you guys are taking a file server and you're kind of doing this en masse thing and you're putting the documents in SharePoint. Why would we say that, hey, Paul, you're finally here.
Good afternoon, Bill.
Paul, why do seagulls not fly over the bay?
Oh, that's a difficult question, Bill. I'm not sure why seagulls don't fly over the bay.
Because if they did, they would be bagels. Yeah, thank you. All right. You guys will all use that at some point in your future. I promise you will. Now, you're in SharePoint putting a bunch of documents in SharePoint. Is the content itself garbage? Probably not. Well, maybe. It might be outdated or whatever. But let's say that you went through an information purging exercise. You got 1 million documents. They're all quality content that you need. And now you're putting them in SharePoint. All right? What would make that garbage? No, it's because it's not the content. So what would make it a garbage effort? When you say no findability, sir. Okay, when you say poor findability, what do you really mean? Hard to find. Okay, but why is it hard to find?
Don't tag it.
There's no,
You didn't tag it.
there's no structure.
There's no structure. You didn't look at where it was going. It just kind of got moved. So when we say garbage in, we're not saying that your content is garbage necessarily. We're saying that how it goes in, with the lack of tagging, and potentially the lack of location caring or caring about the location where it goes, could itself constitute garbage. Does that make sense? So that if all you're relying on is the humble keyword to pull that content, that document out through search, and you're relying on that keyword to have a common meaning across all of those documents, you might be disappointed, and that's what creates the garbage. It's not that the content itself is bad. It's the inherent problems of keyword search that makes it garbage, which is why the metadata can help you a great deal. Putability is the quality of putting content in the correct location with the correct metadata. Okay? And by the way, if you can get putability to roll off your tongue naturally and use the word instantiate, I think we need to instantiate a putability architect that will help us with our findability in our ECM system. Something like that. It's probably worth $5,000 at the next interview. Okay? Just kidding. Who's responsible for tagging? This question would have multiple, you could select multiples, but look at the last three. And I should have changed that 76%. I meant to and I didn't. I had 2 years of Algebra 1 in high school. That's why I got 76 up there. Because none of the numbers add up to 76. That's why I'm a trainer. So, but look at that. Anyone, 23, don't know, 12, no one, 16. That's a lot of people who are just dumping information into information systems and don't really feel responsible to tag it and don't know who's supposed to tag it and all that kind of stuff.
Nobody educated them. You need some kind of education that you have to
Well,
contribute and tag.
look, it goes without saying that your users need robust training, many, many days of training from a high-quality education company. I'm just saying.
Amazon.
I'm just saying, all right? What about fizz? Let's take all this and apply it to fizz. What about fizz oil? What kind of information would they need to find?
Apparently, how many barrels of oil are in the thing they found?
Yeah, how many barrels of oil are under the ground? How many are currently in the water? A kind of nervous laughter on that one. Did you hear that? Yeah. I'm sorry?
Commercial information, the price of the energy, the oil, the resources.
Commercial information. Regulatory information would be huge here, right? Right? You got marketing info. How do you market oil? I mean, you get sunlight and flowers and birds chirping. That's how you market it, right? Where does this information go? I'm sorry? I'm sorry?
We is the company are now going to renewable because it's greener and whatever.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Yeah, good luck with that. All right. Where would this information exist? Where would this information exist? Many sources. Websites, databases, books, Twitter, blogs, wikis, articles, magazines, cartoons, right? SharePoint isn't enough here, is it? Or is it? I'm just telling you right now, it's not. Look, there's some things SharePoint does well. There's some things SharePoint doesn't do well. Oh. You want to know what SharePoint doesn't do well? From my perspective, doesn't do process well. With information that's got to move from one end of a process to another where it has to travel through disparate systems. So it might start out over here in System A, and as it matures, it gets moved into SharePoint, and then out of SharePoint, it gets put into System B, and then maybe over into System C, and maybe parts of it get hooked back. Nah. You can't do that with SharePoint. You've got to have a much larger BPM solution. It doesn't do well with large video, large pictures. So I did some work at the state of Illinois. If you don't know where Illinois is, it's just south of Minnesota, a little bit east. It's where the last 2 governors or 3 are now in prison. I can't remember. Anyways, it's a popular state for having corrupt politicians. And I'm sorry?
The Windy City.
Yeah, it does have Chicago, so Chicago, Illinois. Yeah. By the way, Chicago is an Indian word for rotten onions, just so you know. Because Chicago was built on a bog, and the bog originally had onions that would rot in the bog, and they built Chicago on it. That's why it's windy, yeah. Golly, that was bad. Jeez. Oh, jeez. Yeah, I don't know why I got off on Chicago. But anyways, when I did their Department of Transportation for the state of Illinois, they had a ton of large architectural files and a ton of large pictures and graphs and drawings, CAD, stuff like that. SharePoint's not the place for that. It just isn't. Fizz business goals. These are the business goals that Andrew went over this morning. Improve the accuracy of exploration assessment. Share experience, knowledge, information, and working practices to raise standards across the group. Enable people to connect and ensure accurate, timely, and accessible information for all. That's their stated goals. Now, would you throw SharePoint? You consultants in here. Would you throw SharePoint at all of this? No. No. Some of it you would. You'd have to architect some of it, but you would also have to do some other things in order to even to begin to achieve these goals. You know, enabling people to connect is very vague. I would suggest that that needs to be really, really much better defined. Because there are some connections you want people to make, and there are other connections you don't want them to make, right? You're going to have to line the information at its life cycle with the proper platform. Is SharePoint a good records management tool out of the box?
Better now.
It's better now than it was, agreed. Is it a good one today? No. Now, you go by third party, stick third party on top of it, now SharePoint works, right? But it's really not SharePoint, it's the third party software, right? Is it a good BI tool to surface meaningful information that's related in dashboards and scorecards? Yes? It's not bad, but it has a way to go, right? They also want to retain key talent and support future growth plans. Does SharePoint going to retain your key talent? No. It's not going to do that. Is it going to support your future growth plans? I don't know. I really don't know. Does any software package support your future growth plans? You have to decide what the growth plan is first, and then go back and see what kind of information is needed for that growth plan, and then downstep that to the proper platform. Okay? So let's talk about compliance here for just a moment. For me, and this is a little bit of a different take on governance than I think than what you got from Brad, I really think that risk management, compliance, and governance are three interwoven concepts. You cannot talk about one without talking about the other two. Okay? Let's say that Fizz needs information on compliance. Where would they get that information, and how would they disseminate it within their organization? Think that through. So where would be, we already identified some of the sources. Where would they get their compliance information? They're not going to get compliance information from governance. Oh, government, yes. And the current judges that they're having judgments handed down. I'm sorry, you were saying?
I was saying that engineers just fill out these forms and compliance forms.
Mm-hmm.
From the compliance manager.
Compliance manager, where would the compliance manager get that information? From the government. Yeah, regulatory agencies, that kind of thing. Okay. Once they have that information, now that they know they have to comply, they're going to have to align their business model with compliance, right? One of the core functions of a good board of directors is to test the business model against the compliance and the risk management models that a company has. And there are ways to do that. They also have their compliance information. Now they know what their risks are. One of the largest risks that companies face today is costly risks. I'll put it that way. Costly risks is lack of compliance with regulations. Because the regulatory agencies don't go through a judicial process. They just say you're not compliant, send us 10 billion pounds. Right? What really gets interesting is when one agency says you're out of compliance, but in order to get compliant with that agency, you got to become out of compliant with another agency. That really becomes fun. Okay? But managing risk is in part coming into compliance with your regulatory, in Fizz's case, with the regulatory bodies. Can you have compliance without ethics? No. If you don't have, following the law doesn't mean you're compliant. Just because you're legal doesn't mean you're ethical. So if Fizz is going to be in compliance, they're also going to have some people who have some ethics. And ethics is information baked into my behaviors. It's a particular set of code of conduct or particular values that we hold to as an organization that gets baked into and helps drive some of my behaviors and my words and actions, both inside and outside the company. What does governance then do in this little matrix here? I'm sorry? No, I don't. Brad cannot answer this question. What does governance do in this matrix?
It aligns everyone's individual ethics and views.
It makes sure that the organization is driving towards the compliance, lowering the risk in an ethical way, and that we're also aligning the business model with it. I really struggle. Is governance a verb or a noun? I think in some ways it's both. I'll come back to that on a different day. If your goal really is to ensure accurate, timely, and accessible information for all, which is, I don't know, but if that's the goal, then you're not going to get there without a great information architecture. Now, I define an architecture very differently. I shouldn't say differently, but it's probably not a well-accepted definition because I differentiate between information architecture and information design. Okay? I look at the architecture and say that's the layer at which we kind of take the big chunks of data that we have and we say here are the platforms that we're going to use to host that data. I'm done with my architecture. The rest of it is design. Here's the taxonomies, the processes, the policies, everything around that data of how we're going to utilize it within that system and within our current processes and culture and organization. That's all design work. Now, you don't have to agree with me on that. It's fine if you don't. I still love you. But that's where I go with that. Search is not enough here. SharePoint probably is not enough here. And we're going to discuss some of this tomorrow morning. So let me stop and see what kind of questions you might have about findability.